Hello everyone, Ember here, and welcome back to a new video. In this one I'm going to be taking a look at the best new cards from Paldean Fates. So in 5th spot, to probably no one's surprise, is going to be Great Tusk. I don't think this card is very impressive. That's not saying it's completely useless, but at the same time we definitely have better options, especially in terms of ancient Pokemon. So the nice thing about most of the ancient Pokemon is that the majority of them do seem to be at least somewhat playable in different regards. Like several of them do kind of overlap, like Gouging Fire and Roaring Moon happen to be quite similar in terms of damage output. But the likes of Great Tusk, I kind of don't really see the merits or any immediate uses. So 250 HP, I will say right off the bat, is pretty good, for a basic 2 prize EX. It does mean that if we add a capsule, we're getting up to 310, which is a sizable amount of HP, to be fair. And then the ability Quaking Destruction, however, says if his Pokemon is in the active spot at the end of your turn, discard the top 5 cards of your deck. And then Great Bash for 3 colorless and a fighting does 260, and then it goes through any effects. So 260 is a lot of damage, going through effects is quite nice. But at the same time, costing 4 energy and then having an ability which is going to be having a negative impact on your overall deck just seems really, really weak to me, to be honest. I'm surprised this wasn't like mill the top 3 or mill the top 4. But no, mill the top 5 is pretty grim. It does have me wondering if we'll see maybe some synergy for this card. Maybe we'll see like a single prize Pokemon or something that interacts with cards from your discard pile again. But I'm assuming they wanted this to be paired up with Sada and Sandy Shocks and all the rest of it. But yeah, 260 just isn't a lot, especially when Gouging Fire can do 260 for 2 fire and a colorless. So yeah, I'm not terribly optimistic about this card. I know some people kind of have some faith in it. You could use it with Garchomp EX and Path to the Peak. But yeah, right now I don't see any like immediate uses for it, basically. So yeah, nothing too crazy. In 4th spot, though, we have Mr. Rhyme, which has the attack Make Believe Copycat. For 0 energy, so it is a free attack to use, your opponent chooses one of their own Pokemon's attacks and use that attack as this attack. So this card is only ever as good as depending on what your opponent has already played down. So if they have like a Manaphy in play, this is a good example of it, which I find Manaphy is quite common, does 20 damage for 1 energy or something, that's obviously a terrible attack to be forced to copy. But if your opponent has nothing but Roaring Moons or Iron Valiants, stuff like that, then Mr. Rhyme is actually not like a bad attacker by any means, especially for 0 energy on a free prizer that also happens to have free retreat. So I think there is some uses for this card. I think maybe somewhere down the line, if we ever get into a format that's just maybe a bit more hyper specific, maybe in what we need to use. But yeah, as of right now, I don't see any immediate uses, but I could definitely see Mr. Rhyme being good at some point down the line. Next up, though, is we have a Espathra EX, which isn't terribly impressive, especially not for a Terra type. The Terra ability is nice to have, though. Does have 260 HP, is a Grass type, so you will be hitting weakness on Charizard, and you could also take advantage of Gardenia's Vigor, but then you'd have to run Psychic and Grass Energy. It also has the ability Dazzling Glaze. It says, as long as this Pokemon is in the active spot, attacks used by your opponent's active Pokemon cost 1 colorless more. So phenomenal ability, very disruptive, means stuff like Iron Hands basically can't attack you because who's going to fork out 5 energy to swing into an Espathra? So yeah, I do think the ability is pretty potent, but sadly Cyball just isn't really the modifier that it used to be. Like Mega Mewtwo was quite big back in the day, but yeah, Cyball just doesn't feel great, and the overall damage output, if it's not fantastic, is just a bit mediocre, to be honest, at the end of the day. So yeah, I don't have high hopes for Spathra, but I do think it could be a cool rogue deck nonetheless, or a piece in a control deck potentially. Next up, though, is we do have Iron Treads, which is probably the best EX in the set, to be honest. Number 1 spot is not going to be an EX card. But yeah, Iron Treads, 220 HP future Pokemon, has the attack Clad Rolling for 2 metal and a colorless, which is quite hard to power up. You would have to use stuff like Megenzone from Astral Radiance or use Mirage Gate potentially. Has 150 damage as its main damage output, and you may discard a feature booster capsule attached to Iron Treads. And if you do, during your opponent's next turn, it takes 150 less damage from attacks, which is a very potent effect, but you will officially lose the modifier that future booster capsule gives you, which will prevent you from doing the plus 20 as well as giving you free retreat. I'm not sure if you do 170 and then discard the capsule. I would have to check a ruling based on that. There probably already is some confirmation if you can do that or not. But 170 is a lot more damage than 150 because 170 will KO stuff like the minion, as well as just two-shotting all the big Pokemon, whereas 150 won't. So a pretty interesting card to try and make work, I think. You could also use Iron Crown if you just want the modifier that way, so plus 20 damage. So in all honesty, I don't think this card is terrible. Could see some play, especially in Lost Zone, because minus 150 is a lot of damage to be denying. But yeah, we'll have to see just how consistent this ends up being and if it's worth it in the end. But yeah, Lost Zone seems like a good path because you're already using stuff like Zamazenta from Crown Zenith. So yeah, seems pretty good to me. Then we have TM Crisis Shot as the number one spot. I think this is like one of the most hyped up cards, if not the hyped up card from the set. It's basically like all the other TMs, so you do have to discard it at the end of your turn. But it does give one of your Pokemon the attack Crisis Shot, which does 280 damage for 3 colors, and you can use this attack only if your opponent has exactly one prize card remaining. So in a single prize deck, so like a Xatu deck for example, or a Lost Zone deck, then your opponent will eventually hit one prize at some point in the game, assuming you don't win. And 280 is a lot to throw out. It's basically like saying, well, I now have a Radiant Zard in my deck, but it's for 2 less energy. It's not a one-off Pokemon, so it's pretty convenient, easy to find. And it does mean that we can use stuff like Arven as well to find this card if we really wanted to. And of course, paired it with stuff like Mirage Gate. But yeah, I still think Xatu could be a decent option for this, not just Mirage Gate. You could even use Reverse Energy if you really wanted to, although that's probably finding way too many pieces at some points. I would say Flaffy, but Flaffy does rotate in a few months. We'll still have Flaffy in this card for a little while, but yeah, I still think TM Crisis Shot will be a fantastic addition to Lost Box, as well as any single prize deck that can ramp up energy. Also, stuff like, well, not maybe not Charizard actually, but something like Gardevoir EX potentially as well. But yeah, interesting card nonetheless. I would also like to go over some bonus promos, which we don't know if these are going to be in the main set or not, or if they're going to be delayed until our next official major set. But if Paldean Fates is a catch-up set, which many people think it is, then we should see some of this stuff. So Moonlight Hill says once during each player's turn, you can discard a basic Psych Energy from the hand and heal 30 damage from each of their Pokemon. So interestingly enough, it doesn't specify Psychic Pokemon. So you could play this in like an Espathra deck, for example, and just heal 30 damage from all your Grass Pokemon and Grass support, which is nice. It just means that if you're also playing like a colorless deck and using Psychic Energy to ramp up, so like maybe you're playing some weird GLC build, then maybe Moonlight Hill could be pretty good. So yeah, I think it's pretty cool. And honestly, unfortunately, Gardevoir does seem to be losing a fair bit to rotation, especially the Chilling Reign Gardevoir, which is a shame because I do think Moonlight Hill could be a pretty potent buff to Gardevoir, at least while it's still relevant. The next up we have Squavalian EX, which is a pretty powerful attacker. Spicy Bind isn't anything crazy, but Two-Faced Crash kind of is. 140 damage for 2 Grass Energy, not terrible, will want to kill a Roaring Moon. And you get to discard a random card from your opponent's hand and discard the top card of your opponent's deck. Pretty potent disruption, especially against decks like Lost Zone, which is kind of what this deck wants to counter. It does seem to be a very popular deck in Japan, and I say this with caution because Japan's format it just feels very different to our own because of their best of one system in most events, and yeah, their meta just seems to be very different to our own most of the time. But yeah, Squavalian's still a really cool deck though, and hopefully it ends up being a pretty playable rogue deck once it makes its way over to the west. So looking forward to trying this one out at the very least. And then lastly, to take a look at today, we have Garganacl EX, or Garganacl, which has 340 HP, so a very tanky boy. Also has the ability Salt Body, so it can't be affected by any special conditions. Pretty nice against stuff like Brute Banette, which is cool. Then it also has the attack Block Hammer, which does 170, and during your opponent's next turn, this Pokemon takes 60 less damage from attacks. So pretty potent attack. Does mean that you can use stuff like Double Turbo or even Neo Upper Energy if you don't want to take away the minus 20, but honestly, not a terrible card. I don't think this card is terrible. It's nothing crazy, of course, but in all honesty, it's quite tanky, and if we ever get some good potion cards, then Garganacl could be quite annoying to deal with, so yeah, it doesn't seem terrible at all. But yeah, it's been our power. Thank you for watching. Let me know which is your favorite Pokemon down below, and yeah, thank you for watching.